Good morning. I'm Jerry Woolley. I am filling in today for Joe Huffines. He'll be back with us next week. We're going to continue our study in the Gospel of Mark. And if you've been with us, especially last week, you know that we were studying where Jesus and his disciples had journeyed from the Galilee area to Jerusalem. We know that we're heading towards his last days before crucifixion and resurrection. And in our study last week, we found Jesus and the disciples in the temple on multiple occasions. We know one of those times he just observed the temple to see what all was going on. And the second time he went in, he went in and he cleansed the temple. He turned over the tables of the money changers and just caused people there to become aware that they had allowed the temple to become in essence a den of thieves and robbers and merchants and everything except for what it was supposed to be, which was to be a house of prayer. And he concluded our session last week. Jesus concluded by teaching on the importance of giving our all. He used the example of a lady who had quietly and hopefully without being noticed, she had given two small mites, two small pennies in our language today. And it was all that she had. And Jesus had observed that, and he used that as an opportunity to teach his disciples about giving everything that they had. Today we're going to be in Mark 13, and it begins with Jesus and the disciples leaving the temple and beginning their journey across the valley back over to the Mount of Olives. And as they are exiting the temple complex, one of the disciples turns to Jesus and begins to comment on the magnificent stones, the huge stones in which was used to build the temple. We know that some of the stones were over 40 feet in length, and so they were just massive stones. And Josephus, the historian, tells us that the temple was the most grand building that anyone could even begin to imagine, actually grander than anyone could imagine. He said that everything that could be covered with gold was, and what wasn't covered with gold was white as snow. In fact, some people thought as they were approaching Jerusalem and would see the Temple Mount, they thought they were seeing a snow-capped mountain because of the gold and the pure white of its grandeur. And so this disciple was commenting to Jesus about how magnificent it was. But instead of Jesus carrying on that conversation about architecture or about the beauty, he turns to the disciples and he prophesies that the temple will be destroyed. And of course, we know in about 40 years from this moment, it is destroyed as the Roman troops come in and they burn the city and the temple is destroyed. And so at that moment, though, the disciples are perplexed. Why would Jesus be talking about the destruction of the temple? They move on and come to the Mount of Olives, and as they settle there, Peter and James and John and Andrew, they use that opportunity to approach Jesus and privately ask two questions. And these two questions have been asked from that moment through today. As Jesus predicted the end of time, or at least predicted his second coming, as he predicted the destruction of the temple, the disciples were not exactly sure what he was referring to as he was referring to these two different occasions, but they wanted to know when. When is it going to happen? And so their first question was, tell us when. And then their second question was, give us signs to look for. What should we be looking for in preparation for the second coming? And we have people that still ask those questions today. We have many believers who spend so much time on the study of Revelations, on the study of Daniel, and those are great studies, but in some ways they spend more time trying to understand the end time than they do spending time understanding how they are to live today as believers, how they are to be an impact to the world around them as believers today. And so these two questions, Jesus takes them and he begins a discourse. Some theologians refer to it as the Olivet Discourse, because he was seated up on the Mount of Olives as he began teaching the disciples about his second coming, but also about the destruction of Jerusalem, and specifically the destruction of the temple. And it's not clear as to whether or not they really understood exactly what he was prophesying. but obviously it was words that troubled them. It was words that made them anxious. And so as we look at the entirety of chapter 13, we see things that could easily be topics of debate. They are debated now by many theologians, by many believers, as to exactly what was Jesus referring to. And so we're going to, instead of spending time, since we have such a brief amount of time this morning, instead of spending time getting in those debates, we're going to look instead at what Jesus told them not to look for. He did not answer the question as they wanted it answered. They wanted to know what the signs were, and he didn't give them the answer to the signs. But instead, what he did do was tell them what not to look for. And the first thing that he told them to do was to be prepared. To be prepared. He said, do not look to wars and rumors of wars. Do not look to political issues. Do not look to the government and what's going on with governments as signs. Governments will come and go, wars will come and go. And so that is not necessarily going to be any kind of a sign. And yet, I know in my lifetime, so often when there is a war started somewhere around the globe, you will hear someone stand up and say, this is the beginning of the end. This is a sign of Jesus' second coming. And Jesus said, don't use that as a sign. Instead of looking for a sign, be prepared, be alert, be ready. He also said, do not allow things such as natural disasters, such as famines and earthquakes. Those might be the beginning of birth pains, but they are not the signs of his second coming. He tells us that the reason that we cannot know what the signs are is that, first of all, even he did not know the day or the time. So we're going to skip down and begin with verse 32 this morning. And in verse 32 of chapter 13, Jesus says, "Now concerning that day or hour, no one knows, neither the angels in heaven nor the Son. No one except the Father knows." So he gives this warning in verse 33. He says, "Watch. Be alert, for you don't know when the time is coming. It is like a man on a journey who has left his house. He gave authority to his slaves or to his servants. He gave each one his work and commanded the doorkeeper to be alert. Therefore, be alert, since you don't know when the master of the house is coming, whether in the evening or at midnight or at the crowing of the rooster or early in the morning. Otherwise, he might come suddenly and find you sleeping. And what I say to you, I say to everyone, be alert." I think we can learn through these passages that obviously Jesus was telling his disciples at the time to be alert, because truly just 40 years from this moment, the Roman soldiers would come in and they would sack the city and the temple would be destroyed. And so he was telling believers at that time to be alert. We also know that at this time and shortly after this time, persecution began to happen throughout the Christian community, and he was warning them to be alert. Be alert, not to get discouraged in the midst of persecution, but just to be alert. Be alert of his coming and be alert of what's going on around us. That same admonition, that same warning would be for you and me today. And he is telling us that each day of our life we are to constantly be alert. As I was preparing for this lesson, I read one writer said, the average lifespan is around 75 years of age. And he encouraged readers to figure out their own age, subtract that from 75, and then multiply it by 365 days. And that would tell you the number of days you have left on this earth for an average lifespan. I actually did a little research and found out that for men in the United States, the average lifespan today is a little over 76 years, and the average lifespan for a woman is 81 years. So a little more than the 75 years that the writer used. But I did the math, and for me, I have 4,475 days left on this earth for that average lifespan of 75 years. And when I begin to look at it from that standpoint, and you begin looking at each day as one less day that you have here on earth to impact the world for the kingdom, to be a witness, to be one sharing my faith, it makes a huge difference than when we just go through day after day not really paying attention to the fact that the end is coming. The end is coming for my earthly body here, and the end is coming for your earthly body. And what are we going to do with that time? How are we going to be alert? How are we going to be prepared? And what are we going to do with that time? I read a story about Alfred Nobel. And you may know Alfred Nobel, a Swedish chemist who developed dynamite and other explosives. And he had become very, very wealthy in the process of doing that. But at one point in Alfred Nobel's life, his brother passed away. And a newspaper, by accident, they printed the wrong obituary. They printed Alfred's obituary instead of his brother. And one of the comments in the obituary was that he had made his fortune off of making it possible for people to destroy other people in unprecedented numbers. As he read that, it was a wake-up call, and he was given a preview of his future, that his legacy was going to be one of destruction, not of good, not of building society, not something positive, but something negative. And so from that day, he made the decision that he was going to use his wealth. He was going to use the time that he had left on this earth in a very, very positive way. And so today we've heard of the Nobel Peace Prize. He took his wealth and he put it into trust funds that would allow for people to be recognized and awarded for doing great things for humanity, things that advanced humanity. He was given a preview of the future. Well, in chapter 13 of Mark, you and I are given a preview of our future. We are shown that, yes, the second coming will come. Yes, persecution may come. Yes, the end of this earthly body may come. But instead of fretting and instead of worrying about it, what are we going to do with the time that we have? Some people say that every day is borrowed time, and in reality it is. It's borrowed time. It's the grace of God that we have that time. And so we know that during the time that we have left, we have the opportunity to make a difference. Today's lesson is a wake-up call. Today's lesson is one where Jesus says, be alert, be prepared, be ready for the future, but make a difference in the days that you have. Make sure that you're sharing those days with others and you're making a positive impact. Would you join me as we pray? Father God, I thank you that you have given each of us life, and that because of the great love and the great mercy and the great outpouring of grace that you have on us, you have given us an opportunity to make a difference. Father, help us to be alert. Help us to take this warning of being prepared and being alert to heart, and to make a difference in the world around us with the days that we have left. We love you.